All right, folks, we're now going to take a look at how to handle ratios on the exam. And a lot of times people say, do I have to memorize 30 or 40 ratios? Probably not. You know, having a familiarity with what you think goes on most of them, we give you clues on which ones we think are the most likely to be tested. But ultimately, we're going to show you some additional strategies here. And we got 5 strategies. When calculating ratios for multiple choice, if both the numerator and denominator have 3 zeros, for multiple choice, just get rid of the zeros. If they're all, 520,000, etc., 622,000, if there's 0, 0, 0 at the end, just get rid of them. Unfortunately, you can't do that on the actual big problems on the exam. So in this case, if simulations have them, you got to put them all in. All right, let's move on to the next page. Let's take a look at calculating the in-days formula rather than the turnover formula for certain items. Remember, what they'll do a lot of times is say, what is the accounts receivable turnover ratio? And all of a sudden, I'll come up with the answer 12. And you're like, what does that mean? That means it turns over once every 30 days. The average collection is 30 days because it's 360 days divided by 12 means 30 days. Same thing with inventory. If inventory turns over 6, what does 6 mean? 6 means that it turns over once every 60 days, every 2 months. Why? Because 360 divided by 6 equals the 60-day process. So sometimes it's easier to interpret the meaning when you look at it in days instead. So accounts receivable, you can divide it by 365 or 360. They'll usually tell you. And if it's inventory turnover, you'll notice it's by the same, 365 or 360. Let's move on. Strategy 3, be able to interpret the ratio. This is always important. If receivables used to be a turnover of 12 and now they're only a turnover of 8, that means they're slowing down. It takes longer to collect. Why are we taking longer to collect? Either we're not doing an effective job at collecting, or we've granted extended payment terms to encourage people. Hey, buy now, pay later, right? So you'd look at that. That would be a classic example in this one. In other words, lower is better because companies like their cash as soon as they can. So lower amount of days, not the number, right? I want the higher number in the turnover. I want it turning over really fast because then that tells me that I'm collecting my money faster. Let's move on to the next slide. Be familiar with the following relationships. The numerator has a direct relationship with the ratio. So you'll notice if the numerator goes up, the resulting ratio goes up. Let's try the next item. If the numerator goes down, the resulting ratio goes down. So sometimes you may not even have to do the calculation. You'll know that it's changing the ratio and having it go down. Let's go on to the next slide. If the denominator is being the one that's changing, that has an inverse relationship. Denominator going up means the ratio goes down, right? Let's go on to the next slide. And if the denominator is going down, the resulting ratio goes up. Let's try one more. So here's a strategy. When both the numerator and the denominator are affected by a given change, we don't know what the result is, right? We don't know. So we'd actually have to go through the math in order to find that out. There are 2 ways to determine the final result. Option 1, use the numbers in the problem or make up numbers. A lot of times I remember when I sat for the exam, and I've given this advice to CPA candidates for over 30 years now, I've said, you know what? If all they're doing is saying what's happening or what happens if, well, then make up your own numbers. Just say, I'll pretend that it was 1,000 and that it was over 5,000, and then change the numbers around. See if number changed here and number changed there, what happens? Might help, might. And then option 2, rationalize which effect will be proportionally larger. Let's go on to our next slide. Here's an example for us. And in this example, we have net credit sales of 1,800. And by the way, whenever you're doing receivables, remember, they always simply say, all sales were on credit. But if they were to ever say only 80% of sales were on credit, then you take sales times 80% because you're only measuring credit sales compared to receivables. Remember, receivables only occur because of credit sales. If it's a cash sale, it was collected right away. So right here we have that. We have receivables beginning and end of the year. In this particular problem, I can sit there and measure this. It's 295. That's the average. So our turnover formula would be the actual amount, 1,800, divided by the average, which we now know is 295, and that equals 6.1. What does 6.1 mean? Take that and divide it, right? Take 300 and say 60 days, right? And divide it. And what do you come up with? Approximately, I'm just using simple math here. You're coming up with about once every 60 days, your items are collected. Everybody see how I've done that? Very, very straightforward, right? So let's move on to our next slide. If you weren't sure how to do it, you would ask yourself the following question. Net sales, average items in this particular case. I could plug in some numbers here and see what happens. Now, what happens with this if you see 8.2 versus 6.1? Is that better or worse? Better. Faster. Faster is always better. So hence, we're now going to show in that particular case that the collection period has gone from 60 days, maybe down to 45 days. We're getting our money faster, and we always like that. Let's go on to our next slide. Option 2, rationalize. Sales is significantly larger than receivables. The 200 is going to have a greater proportional effect on the receivables than sales in this case, where things changed. So therefore, the effect to the denominator of the accounts receivable will be larger. This would result in an overall increase in the ratio, which we did see. Let's go on. There's your formula again. Credit sales, and I do emphasize that, divided by average net receivables. Let's move on. Once again, you can see arrows going up. They went down. Very, very straightforward, isn't it? Moving on. So you can see here, if you have to calculate Creative CPA's current ratio and select the most appropriate explanation providing the change in the ratio. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what are our current assets? Current assets are right here. So if I'm looking at current ratio, I'm taking current assets, current liabilities. Isn't that right? That's simple, right? For our quick and current ratios, we're going to use those kind of items. So let me eliminate that. What you can see here is year 1 versus year 2. And you say, well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is in year 1, for every $1 of liability coming due, we had $13.30 to pay it. In year 2, for every $1 of liability coming due, we only had $7.40. So obviously, we've moved a lot of our liquid assets into non-liquid assets, or we've just simply lost them. So that would be a classic example there. Let's move on to our next slide. An analysis, the current ratio measures your ability to make and pay your current bills. The ratio decreased from $13 for every $1 down to $7. All right, meaning that the company's ability to meet short-term obligations did deteriorate, either because current assets decreased or current liabilities increased. Moving on. What is the most likely explanation? Well, the company issued stock. No, you'd get money for that. The company instituted less stringent collection policies. Possibly that would have lowered receivables, right? How about the company removed full depreciated assets? That's non-current items, has no impact. Or accounts payable has increased. That could certainly be part of the reason. Accounts payable going up. The only problem with that is if accounts payable go up, chances are your cash hasn't gone down. So that's an interesting way to look at that one. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we take a look at this, I just want to emphasize this is a way of interpreting the ratios and then analyzing them from an audit perspective to determine, does this raise any additional risks that we need to take a look at? With that, you're now ready to try a bigger problem.